The morning sun burned hot against Samuel Morrison's weathered face as he guided his horse through the rocky canyon. He had been traveling alone for 3 days, heading west toward California, with nothing but his rifle, a bag of supplies, and dreams of gold. The year was 1849, and like thousands of other men, Samuel believed fortune waited somewhere beyond the endless mountains. His horse suddenly stopped and refused to move forward. Samuel looked down and saw why. There, lying against a large boulder, was a man covered in blood. The stranger's dark skin and long black hair told Samuel he was a Native American. 3 arrows stuck out from his chest and shoulder, and his breathing came in short, painful gasps. Samuel quote. His first thought was to ride away quickly. Everyone had warned him about hostile tribes in these parts. Stories spread through every trading post about settlers who never returned home. But as he looked at the dying man, something inside Samuel wouldn't let him leave. The wounded stranger was barely alive, his lips cracked and dry from thirst. Climbing down from his horse, Samuel approached carefully. The man's eyes opened slowly, dark and filled with pain. He tried to speak but only made a weak sound. Samuel could see the man was desperately thirsty. Without thinking twice, Samuel pulled out his water canteen and knelt beside the stranger. "Easy there," Samuel whispered, lifting the man's head gently. "Drink slowly." The cool water touched the man's lips and he drank eagerly. Some water spilled down his chin, but color began returning to his pale face. Samuel gave him more, watching, as strength slowly returned to the stranger's body. The wounded man looked up at Samuel with grateful eyes, speaking words in a language Samuel couldn't understand. Samuel knew he should keep moving, but he couldn't leave the man to die alone. He made a small fire and used strips from his own shirt to clean the wounds. The arrows had gone deep, but none seemed to hit vital organs. Working carefully, Samuel managed to remove 2 of the arrows, though the third was buried too deep to pull out safely. As evening approached, Samuel made camp beside the wounded stranger. He shared his dried meat and gave more water, watching as the man grew stronger. Through simple gestures, the stranger pointed to himself and said, "Ayana." Samuel pointed to his own chest and said his name. Though they couldn't speak the same language, they began to understand each other. Ayana pointed to the mountains and made violent gestures, showing Samuel that enemy warriors had attacked his hunting party. His friends were all dead, and he had crawled here to die alone. Samuel felt sorry for this man who had lost everything. Throughout the night, Samuel kept the fire burning and gave Ayana water whenever he asked. By morning, Ayana was much stronger. He could sit up and even stand with Samuel's help. The stranger looked at Samuel for a long moment, then placed his hand over his heart and spoke earnestly in his own language. Even without understanding the words, Samuel knew Ayana was thanking him for saving his life. Samuel helped Ayana onto his horse, planning to take him somewhere safe before continuing his own journey. But as they prepared to leave, Ayana became agitated. He pointed toward the canyon entrance and made urgent sounds. Samuel looked but saw nothing unusual, just rocks, trees, and empty trail stretching into the distance. Unknown to Samuel, his act of kindness had been witnessed. High on the canyon walls, hidden behind rocks and scrub brush, several pairs of eyes had watched everything. Ayana's people had been searching for him since the attack. They had found his trail and followed it here, arriving just as Samuel was, caring for their wounded brother. The watchers had seen Samuel give water to a dying man when he could have taken anything valuable and left. They watched him tend wounds with gentle hands and share his food without asking for anything in return. This white man was different from the others they had encountered. Word spread quickly through hidden signals that only the tribe understood. Samuel helped Ayana down the canyon trail. Neither man knew that dozens of warriors were moving through the mountains around them. The tribe was preparing something that would change Samuel's life forever. But that revelation would have to wait until tomorrow, when the sun rose on a sight that would leave Samuel speechless. For now, Samuel simply focused on helping his new friend reach safety, unaware that his simple act of sharing water with a wounded stranger had set in motion events that would echo through the canyons for generations to come. Samuel woke before dawn to the sound of his horse neighing nervously. Something was wrong. He had spent the night in a small clearing beside a creek, with Ayana sleeping peacefally near the dying campfire. The wounded man had recovered enough to walk short distances, though he still needed help with the deep arrow wound in his shoulder. As Samuel opened his eyes fully, his blood turned cold. Standing silently around their camp were dozens of Native American warriors. They had appeared like ghosts in the early morning mist, forming a complete circle around Samuel and Ayana. Some held bows with arrows ready, others carried spears and tomahawks. Their faces were painted with red and black designs that made them look fierce in the dim light. Samuel's heart pounded as he reached slowly for his rifle, but stopped when he realized how hopeless his situation was. There were too many of them, and they had positioned themselves perfectly. Any sudden movement would mean certain death. He had heard stories of what happened to white men captured by hostile tribes, and none of those stories ended well. Ayana stirred and opened his eyes. When he saw the warriors surrounding them, his face lit up with joy instead of fear. He called out in his native language, his voice strong and excited. Several of the warriors stepped forward, their stern expressions changing to looks of relief and happiness. Samuel realized these weren't enemies. They were Ayana's people, and they had come looking for him. The largest warrior, clearly a chief by his elaborate feather headdress and decorated clothing, approached slowly. He was an imposing man with broad shoulders and intelligent eyes that seemed to see everything. His face bore the scars of many battles, but when he looked at Ayana, his expression softened with obvious affection. Ayana struggled to his feet and spoke rapidly to the chief, gesturing toward Samuel repeatedly. The wounded man was telling his story, explaining how Samuel had found him dying and shared his water. Other warriors gathered closer to listen, their painted faces showing surprise and interest as Ayana continued speaking. Samuel remained very still, trying to appear non-threatening while his mind raced with possibilities. Would they believe Ayana's story? Even if they did, would it matter? Many tribes had been betrayed by white settlers so often that they trusted no outsiders. Samuel had heard of cases where even friendly gestures were seen as tricks. The chief listened carefully to Ayana's words, occasionally asking questions that made the younger man nod vigorously. When the story was finished, the chief studied Samuel with penetrating eyes. Samuel met his gaze steadily, trying to show respect without appearing weak. Long moments passed in tense silence while the chief made his decision. Finally, the chief stepped forward and spoke in broken English. You give water to dying man. You not take his weapons. You not leave him for death. His voice was deep and measured, carrying the weight of authority. Why you do this thing? Samuel swallowed hard before answering. He was hurt and thirsty. I couldn't just leave him there. The simple honesty in his words seemed to impress the chief, whose stern expression softened slightly. The chief turned to his warriors and spoke in their language. Samuel caught the word for water several times and noticed how the warriors' aggressive postures began to relax. Whatever the chief was saying seemed to be changing their mood from hostile to curious. Ayana hobbled over to Samuel and placed his hand on the white man's shoulder. Speaking earnestly to his people, he showed them the bandages Samuel had made from his own shirt. He pointed to the carefully tended wounds and the empty water canteen that had saved his life. The warriors murmured among themselves, clearly moved by their brother's testimony. The chief raised his hand for silence, then walked in a slow circle around Samuel, studying him from every angle. Samuel felt like he was being weighed and measured, his entire character being judged in these crucial moments. The lives of countless white settlers had been decided in similar situations, and Samuel knew his fate hung in the balance. When the chief completed his circle, he stopped directly in front of Samuel and extended his hand. Samuel hesitated only a moment before grasping it firmly. The chief's grip was strong and calloused from years of warfare and hunting. When he spoke again, his voice carried a tone of respect that Samuel hadn't expected. I am Chief Running Bear. This man you save is my son. Samuel's eyes widened in surprise. No wonder the warriors had seemed so concerned. My son, tell me you have good heart. You share water when you could take life. You tend wounds when you could steal weapons. Chief Running Bear paused, looking back at his warriors before continuing. My people discuss what to do with white man who saves chief's son. We decide you are different from other white men who come to our land. You show honor. Samuel felt a wave of relief wash over him but sensed that more was coming. The chief's expression suggested this encounter was far from over. The warriors remained in their circle, watchful and ready, as if waiting for some important ceremony to begin. You do great kindness for my family, Chief Running Bear continued. Now my people must decide how to repay this debt. We have ways of honoring those who show true friendship. But first you must come with us to our village. There are things you must see and understand. Samuel realized his journey west had just taken an unexpected turn. Whatever lay ahead in the tribal village would determine not just his immediate future, but possibly the course of his entire life. The journey to the village took most of the day, winding through mountain passes that Samuel never would have found on his own. The warriors moved like shadows through the landscape, following hidden trails that seemed invisible to his untrained eyes. They traveled in complete silence except for occasional bird calls that Samuel gradually realized were signals between the scouts ahead and behind their group. Chief Running Bear rode beside Samuel, occasionally pointing out landmarks or explaining the meaning of certain rock formations. The chief spoke slowly in his broken English, but Samuel could tell he understood much more than he could say. Ayana traveled on foot with help from two younger warriors, insisting he was strong enough to walk despite his wounds. As they climbed higher into the mountains, Samuel began to see signs of the tribe's presence. Carefully camouflaged lookout posts were built into cliff faces, nearly invisible unless you knew where to look. Smoke signals rose from distant peaks, clearly announcing their approach to the village. Samuel realized this tribe had created an elaborate early warning system that could spot intruders from miles away. Your people are very careful, Samuel observed to Chief Running Bear during one of their brief rest stops. The chief's expression grew serious. Must be careful. Many white men come with bad hearts. They take our land, kill our buffalo, break promises. We learn to watch and protect. He studied Samuel carefully. You seem different, but we have been fooled before. Samuel understood the chief's caution. Stories traveled both ways along the frontier, and he had heard plenty about broken treaties and violent conflicts between settlers and tribes. Trust was something that had to be earned on both sides, and Samuel realized he was being given a rare opportunity to prove himself. The landscape changed as they climbed higher, becoming more rugged and beautiful. Ancient pine trees stretched toward the sky, and clear streams cascaded down rocky slopes. Samuel saw deer watching them from distant meadows and heard the calls of eagles circling overhead. This was untouched wilderness, the kind of country that made a man feel small and humble. Late in the afternoon, they reached a narrow canyon entrance that looked like just another crack in the rock wall. Chief Running Bear led them through this opening, which widened after a few hundred yards into a hidden valley. Samuel's breath caught in his throat when he saw what lay before them. The village was larger than he had expected, with dozens of hide-covered lodges arranged in careful patterns throughout the valley. Gardens of corn, beans, and squash grew in neat rows near a clear stream. Children played between the lodges while women worked at various tasks, their colorful clothing bright against the natural backdrop. Men tended horses in meadows at the far end of the valley. What struck Samuel most was how organized and peaceful everything appeared. This wasn't the savage camp he had been taught to expect, but a thriving community with its own customs and way of life. The people looked healthy and prosperous, clearly masters of surviving in this challenging environment. As their group entered the village, activity stopped. Children ran to their mothers, who gathered to watch the unusual sight of a white man being escorted by their warriors. Samuel felt dozens of eyes studying him, trying to determine whether he represented friend or foe. He kept his expression calm and respectful. Following Chief Running Bear's lead, an elderly woman emerged from the largest lodge, her gray hair braided with colorful beads and her clothing richly decorated with intricate designs. Samuel could tell immediately that she held an important position in the tribe. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, missing nothing as she approached their group. My wife, Singing Crow, Chief Running Bear explained quietly. She is wise woman, knows much about healing and spirits. Singing Crow spoke rapidly to her husband in their language, clearly asking about Samuel's presence. The chief replied at length, gesturing toward Ayanna and explaining the situation. Samuel watched the woman's expression change from suspicion to surprise to something that might have been approval. Ayanna limped forward and embraced his mother, speaking earnestly about Samuel's kindness. Singing Crow listened to her son's words, then approached Samuel directly. She was much shorter than he was, but her presence seemed to fill the space around them. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "My son says you have good spirit," she said in English that was clearer than her husband's. "He says you gave water when he was dying, expected nothing in return. This is unusual for white man." Samuel nodded respectfully. "Your son needed help. I did what anyone should do." Singing Crow's eyes narrowed slightly. "Not anyone would do this thing. Many white men see wounded Indian, they finish the killing. Others take weapons and horses, leave man to die. You did neither. Why?" The question hung in the air as the entire village seemed to wait for his answer. Samuel thought carefully before responding. "Because he was a person in need. The color of his skin didn't matter when he was dying of thirst." A murmur went through the gathered crowd as Singing Crow translated his words. Samuel couldn't tell if the reaction was positive or negative, but he noticed that some of the tension seemed to ease from the warriors' postures. Singing Crow studied Samuel for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "You will stay in our village tonight. Tomorrow, council will meet to decide what honor should be given to man who saves Chief's son. Until then, you are under our protection." As the crowd began to disperse, Samuel realized his simple act of sharing water had brought him into a world completely different from anything he had ever experienced. The village bustled with evening activities as cooking fires were lit and families gathered for their meals. Children peeked at him curiously from behind their parents, while elders watched him with expressions that seemed to weigh his very soul. Chief Running Bear led Samuel to a small lodge that had been prepared for him. "Rest now," the chief said. "Tomorrow brings important decisions. Council will decide if you are friend or if you must leave our land forever." Samuel settled into the unfamiliar surroundings, knowing that tomorrow would determine his fate in ways he was only beginning to understand. Samuel woke to the sound of drums echoing through the valley. The rhythmic beating had a ceremonial quality that made him understand this was no ordinary morning. Through the hide walls of his lodge, he could hear the village stirring to life earlier than usual. Voices called to each other in the tribal language, and footsteps hurried past his temporary shelter. A young warrior appeared at the entrance to his lodge, gesturing for Samuel to follow. The man led him to a stream where Samuel was able to wash and prepare himself for whatever lay ahead. When he returned to the village center, he found that a large circle had been formed with logs and stones for seating. This was clearly where the tribal council would meet. Chief Running Bear approached, wearing more elaborate clothing than the day before. Eagle feathers adorned his hair, and his chest was decorated with a breastplate made of bone and colorful beads. Other tribal elders were similarly dressed, indicating the importance of this gathering. Samuel realized that his fate was about to be decided by the most respected members of the community. "Sit there," the chief instructed, pointing to a spot in the center of the circle. Samuel took his place, feeling the weight of dozens of eyes upon him. The entire village had gathered to witness the council's deliberation. Men, women, and children sat in rows behind the circle of elders, creating an amphitheater effect in the natural clearing. Singing Crow entered the circle carrying a bundle of burning sage. She walked slowly around the gathering, letting the aromatic smoke drift over everyone present. Samuel had heard that many tribes used sage for purification ceremonies, believing it would help them make wise decisions and speak truthfully. The ritual gave the proceedings a solemn atmosphere that made Samuel's heart beat faster. When the purification ceremony ended, Chief Running Bear stood and addressed the council in their native language. His voice carried the weight of authority as he explained the situation that had brought Samuel to their village. Samuel could pick out a few words he recognized: water, wounded, and enemy, but most of the speech remained a mystery to him. After the chief finished speaking, Ayanna limped into the circle. Despite his injuries, he stood as straight as possible and spoke passionately to the assembled elders. He pointed to Samuel frequently and touched his own chest where the arrows had wounded him. Even without understanding the words, Samuel could tell that Ayanna was defending his actions and vouching for his character. One by one, other members of the council stood to speak. An elderly man with white braids expressed what sounded like concerns about trusting any white man. A middle-aged woman argued forcefully about something, gesturing toward the mountains where other tribes might be watching. A younger warrior seemed to be questioning whether Samuel's actions were genuine or part of some larger deception. The debate continued for over an hour, with different council members expressing various viewpoints. Samuel sat quietly throughout, knowing that his life hung in the balance of this discussion. He thought about the choices that had brought him to this moment, his decision to head west, his choice to help a wounded stranger, his willingness to accompany the warriors to their village. Finally, Singing Crow stood to address the council. Her voice was clear and commanding as she spoke at length about what she had observed. She gestured toward Samuel and seemed to be describing her impressions of his character. When she finished, she sat down with the satisfied expression of someone who had made an important point. Chief Running Bear rose again and spoke briefly to the council. Then he turned to Samuel with an expression that revealed nothing about the decision they had reached. "Stand," he commanded. Samuel got to his feet, trying to keep his legs steady, despite the tension flowing through his body. The entire village had fallen silent, waiting to hear the verdict that would determine his future. "Council has spoken," Chief Running Bear announced in English so Samuel could understand. "We have heard testimony of your actions. We have discussed what kind of man shares water with dying enemy when he could take scalp for trophy. We have debated whether white man can truly have honorable heart." The chief paused, letting the suspense build before continuing. "Some members believe you cannot be trusted. They say white men always betray tribes eventually. Others believe your actions show true friendship and deserve reward." Samuel's mouth felt dry as he waited for the final judgment. Around the circle, the faces of the elders remained impassive, giving no hint about which opinion had prevailed. After much discussion, council has reached a decision, Chief Running Bear continued. "You saved life of Chief's son when you could have taken his possessions and left him to die. You tended his wounds with gentle hands and shared your water freely. These are actions of man with good heart." Relief flooded through Samuel, but the chief held up his hand to indicate he wasn't finished speaking. However, trust must be earned over time, not given because of single act of kindness. Council decides you may stay with tribe for 1 full moon. During this time, you will work alongside our people and show us your true nature. If you prove worthy of trust, you will be offered great honor. If you prove false, you will be sent away and never allowed to return. Samuel nodded his acceptance of these terms. A month living with the tribe would certainly delay his journey to California, but it was better than the alternatives he had imagined. More importantly, it was a chance to prove himself to people who had good reason to be suspicious of outsiders. "Do you accept this judgment?" Chief Running Bear asked formally. "I accept," Samuel replied, his voice steady despite the magnitude of what he was agreeing to. The chief smiled for the first time since Samuel had met him. "Good. Tomorrow your trial period begins. You will live as one of us, work as one of us, and learn our ways. At end of 1 moon, council will meet again to decide your permanent fate." As the formal ceremony ended, Samuel realized his adventure was just beginning. The next month would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine, but it would also give him the opportunity to earn the trust and respect of people who lived by codes of honor, as old as the mountains themselves. The first week of Samuel's trial period tested every skill he possessed and revealed how much he didn't know about survival in the wilderness. The tribe assigned him to work alongside their hunters and gatherers, expecting him to contribute meaningfully to the community's daily needs. Samuel quickly discovered that his frontier experience, while valuable, was nothing compared to the generations of knowledge these people possessed about living in harmony with the land. His first hunting expedition was humbling. Samuel considered himself a decent shot with his rifle, But the tribal hunters moved through the forest like ghosts, reading signs in broken twigs and disturbed earth that were completely invisible to him. When they finally spotted a deer, Samuel's excited movement spooked the animal before anyone could take a shot. The other hunters said nothing about his mistake, but their disappointed expressions spoke volumes. Black Eagle, a warrior about Samuel's age, became his unofficial teacher. The man spoke some English and seemed genuinely interested in helping Samuel succeed. White man hunt with noise, he observed after their failed deer hunt. Must learn to move like shadow, think like prey. Animal. Under Black Eagle's patient instruction, Samuel began learning skills that no frontier guide had ever taught him. How to walk without snapping twigs underfoot, how to read the wind direction and approach game from downwind, how to identify which plants were safe to eat and which would cause sickness or death. Each lesson revealed how much the tribe depended on knowledge passed down through countless generations. The work was physically demanding. Samuel joined groups that gathered firewood from high mountain slopes, hauled water from distant streams, and helped repair lodges damaged by recent storms. His hands, already calloused from frontier life, developed new blisters in places he didn't know could blister. But he noticed that every member of the tribe, from children to elders, contributed according to their abilities. No one expected to be fed or sheltered without giving something back to the community. After 2 weeks, Samuel began to understand the rhythms of tribal life. Early mornings were for individual tasks and family time. The main work of the day happened during the cooler hours, with different groups taking responsibility for hunting, gathering, crafting, or maintaining the village. Evenings brought the community together for shared meals and storytelling around central fires. The children were initially shy around Samuel, but gradually warmed up to him when they saw he was learning their ways. They giggled at his attempts to speak their language and delighted in teaching him simple words. Samuel found himself looking forward to these interactions, realizing he had never spent much time around children during his lonely travels. One evening, a crisis tested Samuel's commitment to his new community. A severe thunderstorm struck the valley, bringing hail and dangerous winds that threatened to destroy several lodges. Without hesitation, Samuel joined the efforts to secure the village, working through the night to help families move their possessions to safety and repair damaged structures. During the storm, little Bright Star, the 5-year-old daughter of one of the warriors, became separated from her family in the chaos. Samuel heard her crying over the sound of wind and rain and immediately joined the search. He found her huddled behind some rocks, terrified and soaked to the skin. Without thinking about his own safety, Samuel carried her back to the village, through the dangerous storm. The incident marked a turning point in how the tribe viewed him. Bright Star's father, a stern warrior named Stone Wolf, who had been one of Samuel's harshest critics, approached him the next morning with tears in his eyes. Speaking through Black Eagle as translator, Stone Wolf thanked Samuel for risking his life to save his daughter. "He says you proved something important last night," Black Eagle explained. "When danger came, you didn't think about protecting yourself. First, you thought about protecting one of us. This is how family behaves." Word of Samuel's actions during the storm spread throughout the village. People who had previously watched him with suspicious eyes began including him more naturally in their daily activities. Children ran to greet him when he returned from hunting expeditions. Women offered him food when he passed their cooking fires. The transformation was gradual but unmistakable. As the 3rd week progressed, Samuel's skills improved dramatically. He successfully tracked and killed his first deer using tribal hunting methods, bringing meat to share with families who had been feeding him. He learned to identify dozens of edible plants and proved useful on gathering expeditions. Most importantly, he began to understand the complex social relationships that held the community together. Singing Crow became one of his strongest supporters, often inviting him to share meals with the chief's family. She taught him basic phrases in the tribal language and explained cultural traditions that would have taken him months to figure out on his own. Samuel realized she was evaluating him not just as a potential friend to the tribe, but as someone who might become family. "You learn quickly," she observed one evening as they watched the sunset paint the canyon walls in brilliant colors. "Some white men never understand that land must be respected, not conquered. You begin to see with Indian eyes. The final week of Samuel's trial period brought unexpected challenges. Scouts reported that a group of hostile warriors from a rival tribe had been seen near their territory. The entire village prepared for possible conflict with weapons cleaned and defenses strengthened. Samuel found himself included in the preparations, treated as a full member of the community despite his white heritage. Chief Running Bear assigned Samuel to help guard one of the canyon entrances, a position of significant trust. "If enemies come, you will fight beside my people," the chief explained. "Are you prepared to risk your life for tribe that adopted you?" Samuel looked around the village that had become his home, thinking of the friends he had made and the family that had embraced him. Bright Star waved at him from her family's lodge, and Black Eagle nodded with respect from across the clearing. These people had given him something he had never found in all his wandering, a place where he belonged. "Yes," Samuel answered without hesitation. "I am prepared." The attack never came, but Samuel's willingness to defend his adopted home didn't go unnoticed. As the full moon approached, marking the end of his trial period, everyone in the village knew that Samuel Morrison had proven himself worthy of the honor the council was about to bestow upon him. The night before the final council meeting, Samuel couldn't sleep. 1 month of living with the tribe had changed him in ways he was still discovering. The gold fields of California, which had once seemed so important, now felt like a distant dream from another lifetime. He had found something more valuable than gold in this hidden valley, a sense of belonging he had never experienced before. As dawn broke over the mountain peaks, Samuel heard the familiar sound of drums calling the village to gather. But this time the rhythm was different, more complex and ceremonial than anything he had heard during his month with the tribe. When he emerged from his lodge, he saw that the entire village was dressed in their finest clothing, with elaborate headdresses and colorful decorations that indicated this was a very special occasion. Black Eagle approached him carrying a bundle of clothing. "These are for you," he said with a smile that hinted at secrets Samuel wasn't supposed to know yet. The bundle contained leather pants and a shirt decorated with intricate beadwork, along with a pair of moccasins that fit perfectly. "Singing Crow made these during your time here. She wanted you to look like one of us for today's ceremony." Samuel dressed carefully in the beautiful garments, marveling at the craftsmanship. Every bead had been sewn in place with perfect precision, and the leather was soft as silk against his skin. When he looked at himself in the stream's reflection, he barely recognized the clean-shaven frontier wanderer he had been just 1 month ago. The council circle had been expanded for this gathering, with decorations of feathers, painted shields, and sacred objects that Samuel had never seen before. Chief Running Bear stood in the center wearing a magnificent war bonnet that seemed to capture and reflect the morning sunlight. Singing Crow sat beside him dressed in her finest regalia, her face painted with symbols that Samuel had learned represented wisdom and spiritual power. "Samuel Morrison," Chief Running Bear called in a voice that carried throughout the valley. "Come forward to receive the judgment of this council." Samuel walked to the center of the circle, his heart pounding, but his steps steady. The entire tribe watched in complete silence as he took his place before the assembled elders. He had been through trials and tests, had proven his worth through actions rather than words, and now he would learn his permanent fate. Chief Running Bear began speaking in the tribal language, his words formal and ceremonial. Though Samuel couldn't understand everything, he caught enough familiar words to know the chief was recounting his month of service to the community. The rescue of Bright Star during the storm, his willingness to fight beside them against enemies, his respect for their customs and traditions. When the chief finished his speech, Singing Crow rose and added her own testimony. Her voice was strong and proud as she described Samuel's character and his genuine desire to become part of their family. Other council members nodded in agreement as she spoke, and Samuel began to hope that their decision would be favorable. Finally, Chief Running Bear switched to English so Samuel could understand every word of what came next. "1 moon ago you came to us as stranger, who had shown kindness to my son. Council decided to test your heart and learn your true nature. Today we announce what that test has revealed." The chief paused, building suspense as he looked around the circle at his fellow elders. Each one nodded their agreement with whatever decision had been reached. Samuel held his breath, knowing that these next words would determine the rest of his life. You have worked beside us, learned our ways, and shown respect for our customs. You have protected our children as if they were your own family. You have been willing to fight our enemies and defend our village. Most importantly, you have proven that not all white men come to take from us. Some come to give. Chief Running Bear stepped closer to Samuel, his expression serious but not unfriendly. Council has decided to offer you greatest honor we can give to outsider. We invite you to become blood brother to this tribe, full member of our family with all rights and responsibilities this brings. Do you accept this offer? Samuel's throat tightened with emotion as he realized the magnitude of what was being offered. Blood brotherhood meant permanent adoption into the tribe, complete acceptance as one of their own people. It meant giving up his old life entirely and committing himself to their way of living forever. He thought briefly of the dreams that had brought him west. The gold fields, the chance to strike it rich, the comfortable life he had imagined in California. Then he looked around at the faces surrounding him, people who had become more than friends during his month among them. These were his people now. This valley was his home. And this offer was the answer to a loneliness he had carried for years. I accept with all my heart, Samuel said, his voice strong and clear. The village erupted in celebration as drums began beating and voices raised in traditional songs. But Chief Running Bear held up his hand for quiet, indicating that the ceremony was not yet complete. Then step forward and receive your new name, the chief commanded. From this day forward, you will no longer be Samuel Morrison, white man from distant lands. You will be Stands with Family, brother to our people and guardian of our children. Singing Crow approached carrying a bowl of red paint. She dipped her fingers into the mixture and began drawing symbols on Samuel's face and chest, each mark representing a different aspect of his new identity within the tribe. The paint felt warm against his skin, like a physical transformation taking place.